Hello class. Today we begin the 8th grade standard, which is solving equations with variables on both sides. So this is the actual standard that it says. It says we are to model and solve one variable equations with variables on both sides of the equal sign. And that's what we're going to focus on in this particular lesson. So let's dive right off into it. When we were solving two-step equations, we came up with two basic steps. Step number 1, get rid of your addition and subtraction. How do I do that? I add the opposite. Step number 2 was to get rid of any multiply divide. And how do I do that? Well, we do the opposite. So let me do an example just to make sure that we understand what we're doing. So here's a typical problem. 4x plus 8 is equal to 20. So that's a good problem. So step number 1, we got to get rid of the add subtract. So that means this plus 8 right here. So to get rid of the plus 8, it says in here, we're going to add the opposite. So if I've got a plus positive 8, I need to do a plus negative 8. And if I do that on one side, I have to do that on the other. And now we simplify both sides of the equation. So my 8's are going to go away on the left-hand side, and I'm going to be left with 4x. On the right-hand side, we're going to do 20 plus negative 8, or 20 minus 8, to get 12. Now, we've got to get rid of our multiply divide. And in order to do that, we're going to do the opposite. So if I have a multiply by 4, we're going to do a divide by 4 to get rid of that. So we divide both sides by 4. These two 4's divide out to become 1x, or just x equals. And then 12 divided by 4 gives me 3. So if I were to take that 3, which is what we're saying x is, and plug it back in the original equation, it should make a true statement. So if I do 4 times 3 plus 8, that should equal 20. Well, 4 times 3 is 12, plus 8 does give me 20. So that's how we solved two-step equations. So today what's going to happen is we're going to end up with variables on both sides of the equation. So what we have to do is we kind of have to modify our rules just a little bit. And here's what we're going to do for equations with variables on both sides. We're going to, 1, get the letters to one side of the equal sign. I prefer the left-hand side, so I'm going to move all my letters to the left. How do I do that? I add the opposite. Then we're going to move all our numbers to the other side of the equal sign. And again, we add the opposite. And then the last thing we're going to do, because we will have a multiply or a divide situation, we're going to do the opposite. So let's see if we can do that. So here's our equation. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of any minus. I call that pre-work. So I'm going to look for any minuses that I can change. So I'm going to change this subtraction to addition, next number to its opposite. Because I like everything to be an addition problem, because then if I flip-flop things around, I won't get the wrong answer. So now I need to move my letters to one side. So I personally like my letters to be on the left-hand side. So I'm going to move this 4a over to be with the 9a. So to do that, I've got to get rid of that 4a by adding its opposite. So I'm just going to put a minus 4a underneath it, and I'm going to put a minus 4a underneath the corresponding term in the other expression. So I'm going to put it underneath the 9, or the 9a. And now I do my math. So 9a take away 4a is going to give me 5a, plus this 2 didn't have anything, so I just bring it down, is equal to, the 4a's turn into 0, so they go away, and I'm left with negative 18. Now, if you'll notice, this is now just a two-step equation. So now I need to move this 2 that's on the left-hand side over to on the right-hand side. So again, we do that by adding its opposite. So here I've got a plus 2, so I'm going to do a minus 2 or a negative 2. And I'm going to do that same thing to the other side. And now these 2's on the left are going to cancel each other out and become 0. And I'm going to be left with 5a is equal to, and now we have negative 18 plus negative 2, which is going to give me a negative 20. And if you have trouble with that, please make sure that you're typing that into the calculator. Now we've got one last step. I don't want to know about 5a. I want to know about just 1a. So we need to divide the 5a's into 1a. So I divide both sides by 5. So these 5's divide out into 1, so I'm left with a equals, and then negative 20 divided by 5 gives me negative 4 for my answer. So if I were to check this to see if it works, what I would do is I'd take the negative 4, and everywhere in the original equation, I'd plug in a negative 4. So that means we'd have 9 times negative 4 plus 2 is equal to 4 times negative 4 minus 18. And those should be equal. So if you were to type that into the calculator or just do the math by hand, you're going to find out that 9 times negative 4 is negative 36, plus 2 gives me negative 34 equals. Well, 4 times negative 4 is going to give me a negative 16, and then plus negative 18 is also going to give me a negative 34. So that tells us that negative 4 is the answer to the problem. And that's what we're doing. So there's 3 basic steps that we're going to follow when we're solving equations with variables on both sides. We're going to first get the letters on one side of the equal sign, and we do that by adding the opposite. Then we're going to get our numbers on the other side, and we're going to do that by adding its opposite. Now, it does not matter which order you do those in, whether you do the letters first or the numbers first, as long as you get all the letters on one side, all the numbers on the other side, and then you do one multiply or divide problem. You solve for x, or whatever letter it happens to be, and you do the opposite. So let's see if we can do a few questions. So here's going to be the next problem that we're going to work. Same kind of situation. Got letters and numbers on both sides. So what we need to do is get our variables on one side. So I'm going to move this 2x to the left-hand side. And we do that by adding its opposite. So I'm going to do a negative 2x, because that will get rid of that 2x. And if I do that on one side, you have to do it on the other. And now we just simplify. So 4x and negative 2x make 2x plus 4, because I didn't do anything with the 4, equals. Well, then 2x and the negative 2x actually turn into 0, and I'm left with 36 on the left-hand side. So now we have just a two-step equation. So now I need to move the 4 over to be with the 36. And again, we do that by adding its opposite. So I'm going to do plus a negative 4, and then plus a negative 4 on the right-hand side as well. And again, we do our math. The 2x didn't have anything to join with, so we just have 2x. The 4 and the negative 4 are going to make a 0. And then on the right-hand side, we've got 36 plus negative 4, which gives me 32. Now, I have to get rid of a multiply by 2, because I don't want to know about 2 x's. I only want to know about 1 x. So I divide them in half. And if I divide that in half, I do the same to the 32. So the 2's turn into a 1x, and we just write that as x. And 32 divided by 2 gives me 16. So if I were to plug that value back in, you'd end up with 4 times 16 plus 4 is equal to 2 times 16 plus 36. And you do the math, and you will find out that they are equal. So let's see, 4 times 16 gives me, 64. Plus 4 gives me 68. 2 times 16 gives me 32. Plus 36 also gives me 68. So we find out that it really does work. So let's try just a couple more. This one right here, you'll notice that it's a little bit different because the 6b is in the wrong spot. Okay, as long as it's an addition problem, if you want to rearrange things, it's perfectly okay. So you could write this one as 6b plus negative 15 if you wanted to, and that would be perfectly fine. Okay, in addition, you can rearrange things. So what I want you to do is I want you to pause the video and see if you can solve this one by yourself. Get the letters on one side, get the numbers on the other, and solve. Pause the video and solve for the variable. Okay, so let's see how you did. Now for me personally, I'm going to always move my variables to the left. So I'm going to take this negative 8b and move it over to be with the 6b. And we do that by adding its opposite. So if I have a negative 8b, I'm going to add a positive 8b. And then I'm going to take that same positive 8b and I'm going to place it on the other side underneath its corresponding term. So I'm going to place it underneath the 6b. And now we just do our math. The negative 15 just slides down. The 6b and the 8b make 14b. The negative 8b and the positive 8b cancel each other out. And then we're left with 13 on the right-hand side. So step number 1 is accomplished. Our letters are together. So now I need to get my numbers over on the other side. So I need to move that negative 15 over to be with the 13. So I'm going to add the opposite. So I have a negative 15, so I'm going to add a positive 15. And if I do it on one side, I do it on the other as well. My 15s turn into 0. I'm left with 14b on the left. And then I've got 13 and 15 on the right, which gives me 28. Now, I don't want to know about 14 b's. I only want to know about 1b. So I'm going to, whatever that number happens to be, that's what I divide by, because I know if I have the same number on top and on bottom, that I know it will give me 1. I'm going to divide the other side by 14 as well. So my 14s divide out and become 1. So I'm left with b, which is equal to, and then 28 divided by 14 gives me 2. And that's all there is to solving equations. So let's do one more real quick, one more that's kind of different, and then we'll end this video. So what if we have one that's like this? Well, in this particular case, you'll notice we've got letters on both sides, but I only have numbers on one side. Okay, so that means that we need to still do the same steps, get our letters on one side, numbers on the other, but are our numbers already together on one side? My numbers are already together on the left-hand side. How do I know my numbers are together? There's only one of them. Okay, so that's how I know. So if my numbers are already together on my left, then wouldn't it be kind of stupid if I moved my letters over to the left also? Because then I wouldn't have anything left over on the right. So what you do in a situation like this, if my numbers are already together or my letters are already together on one side, you move the other one to the other side. So that basically means I'm going to take this 4x then and move it over to the right-hand side instead of having them on the left. It's no magic with what side they're on. You still have to do the same thing. So I'm going to move this 4x over to be with the x by adding its opposite. So I'm going to add a negative 4x. Then I'm going to add a negative 4x to the other side. And now my 4x's turn into 0. And on the left, I'm left with 6. And on the right, I'm left with negative 3x. Okay? Now, my numbers are together on the left, where I normally like them on the right. My letters are together on the right, where I normally like them on the left. But it's okay. It doesn't matter. Our job is still the same. Get the variable by itself. So I look at the number with the variable, and it's got to multiply by negative 3. So we're going to do a divide by negative 3. And if I do that on one side, I must do it on the other. So 6 divided by negative 3 gives me negative 2 is equal to, the negative 3's cancel out and become 1x. So I'm left with just plain old x. And x is equal to negative 2. And that's really all there is to solving multi-step equations in this particular instance. We're going to follow 3 steps. Get your letters on one side. How do I do that? Add the opposite. Get your numbers on the other side. How do I do that? Add the opposite. And last but not least, solve. And how do I do that? I do the opposite. If I have a multiply, then you do a divide. If you had a divide, then you would do a multiply. And that's all there is to solving equations with variables on both sides of the equal sign. So until next time, I'll see you later.